Hi, everyone. It's your host, John Gossett with the Life's Worth Living podcast. Thanks for coming back for another week. We're excited to have you here. And tonight, as we get started, I'd like to thank our sponsors. First off, GTM Builders. If you're thinking about building a home, reach out to GTM Builders or check them out online at gtmbuilders.com. They build a beautiful home. They've got 4 model homes in the valley here, so check them out if you're thinking about building. Tonight's episode is brought to you by A. Warner Homes Real Estate. If you're in the market for buying a home, interest rates are extremely low. They'll take care of you. They will look out for your every need. And so if you're thinking about buying or selling, check out A. Warner Homes Real Estate or give them a call at 801-867-5078. Also, tonight's episode is brought to you by Comfort Inn and Suites of Lake Point. So if you've got someone coming in to visit from out of town, or you are thinking about coming into the Tooele Valley, check out Comfort Inn and Suites at Lake Point. Give them a call at 801-250-3600. So as we start tonight, I wanted to kind of give an update on a previous guest that we had on the podcast, Lark Dean Galley. She came on and talked about the loss of her father and her son to suicide. And today when I got home from work, I actually had a copy of her book that she just has put out. The book's entitled Learning to Breathe Again, Choosing to Heal After Losing a Loved One to Suicide. So thank you very much to Lark for sending me a copy of the book. I was privileged enough to be included in a comment at the beginning of the book. And so I felt privileged to be able to do that. So if you're thinking about finding a book to help you through your grief, check that book out. I think you can buy it on Amazon. Again, it's called Learning to Breathe Again by Lark Dean Galley. So I know you guys come back week after week for our amazing guests, and tonight I've got a very, very lucky opportunity to interview Liz Stone and talk to her about some of the things that she's gone through in her life and kind of where her life has taken her now in a totally different direction and an amazing journey. And I think it'll be helpful for a lot of people to hear. As we talk about some of the things in here, there may be some things that could trigger someone that has walked a similar path. And so be very aware of what you're listening to and know that there is hope on the other side, that you can come out stronger and take your life any direction you'd like to. And so I really believe that this episode is going to be full of hope and healing. And so I'd like you to welcome Liz tonight. So
thank you.
So Liz, tell us a little bit about you and where did you grow up, and tell us about your family, your siblings, and kind of let's start out there for a minute.
Sure. So I was actually born and raised here in Utah, and I am the second youngest of 7 kids. And I just love my family. They're amazing, and I now am a wife and mother. We have 3 beautiful children, and we love being out here in Tooele County. And spent some time here, took a short hiatus, moved to Haiti for a short time, which I'll talk about here soon.
Yeah.
And are back, and just really happy to be here in the community and adding to all the good things that are happening here.
Well, we're lucky to have you as part of the community. So,
Thank you.
So kind of tell us where your story starts out. I know it starts out fairly young, so kind of back us up and tell us from the beginning.
Okay, yeah. So I had some challenges growing up. I think like anyone else, we were not a perfect family. We each kind of struggled, but we gratefully, when you have that many siblings, you can kind of draw around and be there for each other. And but when I hit 16, my life just started to take this downward turn, and there were a series of traumatic events, as I call them, and they just started to stack. And so just to start out, when I was 16, one of my best friends and her mother were murdered, and they were murdered as a result of a domestic violence situation. And it was somebody had come to their home looking for this sister, and because they wouldn't tell, wrong place, wrong time, and they ended up losing their lives. And it was actually one of the longest, ongoing investigations in West Valley's history. And as a 16-year-old girl, I could not wrap my brain around what had happened to my friend. And it was difficult to process. And I was already struggling with some depression and things like that. And so I actually ended up falling deeper into that depression, and then became suicidal and attempted suicide at my senior year. I was 17.
Wow.
And was hospitalized up at the university. And I would say that I did everything that I could to get out of that hospital. I didn't do the work. I wasn't there to heal. I didn't see it as the opportunity that it was. I just knew that I had been, separated from friends and from my life. And so I walked that path and was released just before graduation. And so I graduated just barely, but we went on, and so this is where I talk about kind of that downward spiral. I just wasn't in a good place, and we went on a graduation trip with some friends, and while I was on that trip, I was actually raped by a childhood friend. And because the first person that I told expressed disappointment in me, and so I just put it away, and I felt so much shame, and I didn't know what part of that I owned, and so I just put it away, and I didn't tell a soul for years about that. And so I just kind of started my career of running from those traumatic experiences, I guess you could say. And then I left home at 17 because I had graduated very young. I was 17. And I left home and found myself in this abusive relationship. And it wasn't abusive to start, but all of the signs were there. All of the red flags were there. I was not in a space where I was really cluing into things. I was in a lot of pain and just running. And so we ended up in a small basement apartment. I was 17. I feel like I was playing house more than anything, at that age. Just wanted to be grown up, wanted to get away from all the things that had happened. And I really felt like it would be this new start. I was going to get out and start my life. But that abuse continued to get worse and worse. And toward the end, I was actually held captive off and on in restraints in that relationship, and literally was not able to leave at some times. And other times I was not in restraints, but oftentimes, and I think what's hard for people to understand who have not been in an abusive relationship is the fear of, a couple of things. One is you start to lose hope, because if you have tried to leave and been unsuccessful, it can get worse, or and then we start to lose hope and start to get discouraged. And also there can be threats of further violence if you leave, and that was the case for me. Was just that threat that if I left, that he would go after my family. And I knew him to be capable of those type of things because of my experience with him, but I always had that memory of my friend Maureen and how she had died because someone had come to her door. Yeah. And so for me, I was never going to take that to my family's door. And so I didn't tell anyone, and I lived in that situation for right around a year and a half. Somewhere around in there. The timeline gets a little bit fuzzy as I try to think through some of that. But and then at some point, what changed for me is I had a friend show up at the door, and I would say I wouldn't even have called her a friend at the time. She was a gal who lived several doors down, and I knew her. She was an acquaintance. She was the girlfriend of somebody that we had seen at parties or had come over. And I can't even tell you why I answered the door that day, But as I opened the door, she was standing in the threshold, and this light came into my apartment, and it was the first time that I realized that I'd been sitting in the dark. I didn't, as the light changes, sometimes we don't realize. And now I look at that, the symbolism there of, things had just kind of been shutting down in my life, and I hadn't realized where, some of that darkness that had creeped in. But as she stood there that day, she said, "We are leaving." And it just opened up this possibility that it was possible. And I leaned into the "we're" part of that sentence because I really felt like I didn't know how to be successful at that point to leave on my own. And so I did leave with her that day. And then, as often happens in abusive relationships, it's a little bit, it's a lot confusing. And so there was some back and forth for a time while I learned to stand on my own. And then eventually I was able to leave for good. So as I started to see what else, was out in the world and start to get a little bit more clear.
And how lucky were you to be able to make that break? Mm-hmm. So let me back up for a minute.
Sure.
And so you went through something very traumatic as a teenager, losing your best friend. Mm-hmm. Do you think that event, that single event, kind of came into play in your attempt? I mean, was that a big part of it, losing someone that close to you? And it went on for a while, you said, where no one knew who had done it. And,
right. Yeah.
And all of that. So, I mean, the trauma of that in your life, do you think that had a part to play in your attempt?
I think it absolutely did. And on really one of the biggest reasons is because it's not that we can't heal from trauma, but that unresolved trauma is where it starts to stack on top of itself and become a problem. And so, as a youth, struggling already with depression and looking for that sense of belonging, and then we often find that in our peers. And it also just really rattled my world that something that tragic could happen to somebody that I loved so much. And I really, really struggled with that, and just kind of felt numb and lost. And I think that just kind of fed into just kind of that numbness, wanting to escape, which ended up kind of becoming that there's a theme there with, experiencing trauma and then wanting to numb or to escape because that pain is so tremendous. And as human beings, we, it's difficult for us to feel things all the way out sometimes. We kind of can push things off. And that's what I did as I was able to come out of that relationship and start to move forward. I just started to run, and I kind of found different coping skills by way of, like alcohol or drugs or relationships. Work was a really big deal for me. Just trying to constantly stay busy so that I didn't have to deal with all of that. I felt like I was outrunning that. Mm-hmm. And of course that can't go on forever. And the addiction that I tried didn't take away that pain. And attempting suicide and the ideation and those things just added to that pain. And I started to see my family differently and was worried about causing them pain. So that's where I started to look for other ways, like work, or not realizing that was still me avoiding.
Mm-hmm. A distraction.
Yeah, anything that was a distraction.
Now, if you look back to your high school days when mm-hmm. you're suffering that loss, and you attempt suicide, how did your family handle that? How, I'm not trying to point fingers. I'm just wondering, how did they react to the news that you had attempted?
Well, it was actually a friend of mine that saw some cutting and saw some signs, and he actually told my sister. And so my sister told my mother, and then, by that night, I ended up in a facility. But I remember feeling almost betrayed in that moment, because I thought, how could he have told, or how could they have told? And of course, now from this perspective, if you and I were to walk down the road, I would be so grateful, for the role that they played in helping, even just to place like a roadblock in my way. Just those pauses sometimes was somebody reaching out and showing me. But my family certainly tried to, show up for me at the hospital, and and that's difficult because some can and some can't. But I feel like they were supportive in the way that they knew how.
That's great. So once you're released, right before graduation, you're released from the hospital. Did they? Was the thought in the house, it's fixed, or were they still concerned? Did they still see signs that maybe you were in a dark spot?
No, I think for sure everyone was hoping that was fixed.
Gotcha.
And I would say that everyone at that time in our lives, everyone in my family was kind of struggling personally. And so I think everyone was I think they would have wanted to have shown up different. I definitely wasn't extending or sharing information, and everyone was just kind of in a survival mode. Yeah. And so we just kept moving forward, as a family, and trying to make sure that, the lids are on and everybody, is everything settled, and, as we keep moving forward. But I don't think that any of us really had tools or resources and knew how to deal with that at the time, to be honest.
Gotcha. And so then you move into this relationship fairly quickly. Mm-hmm. And how did he like your family?
He actually stayed away from my family for the most part.
And I think that's common. Yeah. That's why I was asking, because it seems like when those relationships happen, those abusive relationships, it seems like there's always this common theme to get the person away from the family, keep them isolated so that they don't have contact with the people that really care about them. And so that was happening.
Absolutely. There was definitely an isolation, and then excuse me, so separating from that, and up until that point they had been my support system. But just starting to buy that story that if I'm in this relationship, he should be my support system, and then buying into that, and then feeling completely alone when that wasn't, real, or wasn't, it didn't show up for me.
And so you were estranged so that you couldn't leave the apartment. And was there physical abuse as well?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was curious, and I just wasn't
absolutely.
sure. And you're more than welcome to tell me to quit asking questions. But I just, those were things
fine.
That were going through my mind. I was thinking, so physical abuse, and I wish that wasn't just such a common theme, but it seems like the abuser always seems to feel like they have to be in control. So there's this manipulation and wanting to keep them isolated from the people that they loved. And I was curious if that was what you had seen as well. So
yeah, absolutely.
So and unfortunately for anybody that's dealt anything with domestic violence, it is common to not dare make that break because you don't want to, and you had firsthand experience of what could happen, and I can imagine how terrifying that would have been because you were still very young.
I was very young. I was 17. I didn't have a lot of life experience to draw on, and I didn't have that close support. I didn't have a lot of models that I would have looked to for healthy relationships, sadly. But also, there's another component of it's confusing for when somebody that you care about is hurting you. There's confusion there. And so initially, your thought isn't, I'm going to get away from this person. At least it wasn't for me. My thought was, what am I doing wrong? How do I fix this? How do I help him? How can I show up in a way so that he doesn't keep doing this? And I started to take on responsibility. And I started to buy into that story. And then, of course, I mentioned that kind of that control piece. If initially, the abuse would get worse and worse, and then sometimes it would end in I would wake up in restraints. Other times, or later toward the end of that experience, it was every time. Every time there was a conflict, I would end up in restraints. And it was absolutely that element of control. But I remember just saying, I would just surrender. We don't have to do the struggle. I would just surrender to that because I was looking to survive. I didn't realize I was just in a survival point. And so I didn't have fight in me, which is why when the restraints weren't there or when he was so sorry, because, the remorse that, and I can't say if it was real or not, but the remorse that he would express and all of, that the next day or afterward is confusing as well because you want to, at least I'm a fixer. Mm-hmm. And so I started to take on that responsibility. And that's why I say when this friend showed up for me, it was the first time that I realized, I didn't even realize it fully, but as that light came in, just recognizing that I had been sitting there alone. I was sitting in the dark. I wasn't in restraints. I could have walked out, but, I had given up on that. And I just really had lost the fight in me. So I was surviving, and that's a really hard place to be. And that leads into all of, and then I think depression adds to that and all those things. So.
Well, and I think, like you'd said, as the abuse happened, you wanted to know, what am I doing wrong?
Right.
And so as you're, in a sense, beaten down, your self-esteem's also going down, and that lets them have more control.
For sure.
And as they have that control, there always seems to be a common theme in domestic violence as well of, they felt so bad for what they'd done. Mm-hmm. And you'd mentioned, I don't know if it was real or what, but there seems to be a form of manipulation to say, okay, I can push it this far, and then I know what I need to do to pull them back in.
Right.
And it's almost a sick yo-yo effect of, and I think that's why it takes so many times. I think the statistic is 9 times it takes of trying to get away before you actually make that break. So, I'm grateful that you did and that you're still here, because those years were pretty traumatic. So as you get away and you try to, keep moving forward, you found other ways to try to numb the pain that you were experiencing. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mentioned some of those different paths that I used, and one of them was work. But and so I found a lot of purpose in work, and I worked a lot. But and then after one failed marriage, it was actually very short. I met and married my husband that I'm married to now, and I remember thinking, everything was going to be okay now because he's an amazing man, and we wanted to have a family. I'd always wanted children. I wanted children since I was a child. That was something I always talked about, was being a mother. Mm-hmm. And so we got married and started having a family, and I really thought that that was the end and everything was behind me, and I had successfully outrun that, and now my life was beautiful, and it was. And but that unresolved trauma does catch up to us. And so I remember I was at a youth activity, and I had this moment where I realized I wasn't going to be able to do something, but I felt compelled that I had to do it. I had to show up. I had to keep up appearances. I had to, right? But I can't. And that dynamic swirls into this feeling of feeling trapped, and which I've now recognized as a pattern in my life. But that shut me down that day, and I ended up like in the fetal position on the grass, and they called my husband, and I'll never forget when he walked up. He, no joke, had on a white t-shirt and it had a big S, like a Superman S, no joke. And I looked up at him, from the grass, and I thought, oh, thank goodness he's here. Everything's gonna be fine. He's gonna take me home. I'm gonna go home to the safety of my room, and everything's gonna be okay. And he literally picked me up like a child and put me in the car. Took some time to convince me to close the door. Like, I literally didn't want to be shut in anywhere. And later I was diagnosed with agoraphobia and PTSD. And that agoraphobia is that fear of being in a place where you could not easily escape. Imagine that. And so I retreated to the four walls of my bedroom, and then that became my home for a time. And it was hard for me to go out, to the kitchen and then going out onto the back deck. I remember pushing forward and trying to go out and check the mail. I mean, that was how intense it became for me. And all of the ability that I had to run and to keep up appearances were lost. Mm-hmm. And the walls came down, and I had the opportunity to reconcile with all of that. And as those memories came up, I started to unpack them and talk about it. And to be honest, one of the biggest motivating factors for me was that I had children. And there is something about seeing your babies and seeing these perfect little humans and seeing all of this light and hope and promise. And I just started to see that if that was possible and if that was true for them, it was true for me. And I started to recognize that I was a young girl, when those things started to happen, and started to feel compassion for myself. I mean, all of these things that I had put away and that I wasn't allowing myself, being with those babies really started to wake that up in me and was a huge part. And of course, the support that I had around me, just this unconditional allowing. So Steve showing up that day in his Superman Superman shirt didn't save me. It was my work. It was mine to do. And thank goodness, I'm going to say, because if my healing was dependent on someone else, then my hope would always be outside of me. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of power even in the struggle of someone not being able to help you. It feels terrifying in the moment, but it's actually very empowering to recognize that it's our work to do, and therefore we can control it and we can be about it. And so that started about, honestly, like a decade-long journey for me of learning to process through that and to heal. I always talk, I speak a lot and share my story now, but that's kind of the irony is now I share my story, and for years I couldn't find my voice, but finding my voice and telling my truth was a big part of my healing. Mm-hmm. Just to be able to, for me, to be able to acknowledge what happened to me instead of feeling shut down that my story wasn't valuable or that it wasn't real or that somebody else validated what was true for me. There was a lot of power in taking my own story back. And then also so as I've been speaking, I talk about being held captive twice in my life. Once in that literal way, literally at the hands of another in that basement apartment, and then years later being held captive to all of that fear, pain, and shame that I had put away and run from. And so I have spent I've been doing my work, and I have spent time working through pain and, the fear, pain, and shame. And one of the things that I realized, like that PTSD and just being shut down with agoraphobia, that fear was, just so in my face. So it was the first thing that I got the opportunity to deal with. But I had to face all of those things that I wasn't willing to face. And as I looked at them, I realized that it was survivable. Like, I can look at this, I can hear about it or talk about it, and even just allowing myself to feel the fear, not running from the fear, but sitting with the fear. So fear has to be felt. It was something that I learned, and that shame that comes with, what was my part? What did I do to bring this on? Which I think started with that rape after my graduation, and then certainly, like I say, in the abusive relationship, what was my part? I should have known better. I shouldn't have been there. All of those things that that shame can really shut us down and then feed us back into, or has the potential to feed back into those same coping skills, like the addictions or depression, anxiety start creeping up. And so I just recognized that I had to start reframing the shame that I was feeling. And for me, that process came through forgiveness. And I was able to move through a forgiveness process that has helped me to find dignity in my story, because there are things that I now know for sure. And maybe somebody else isn't sure about that in their life, but there are things that I feel very strongly about, and I know for sure, and I know it because I've done it. And so that takes away the shame, and I can move into dignity, and I can look you in the eye and I can say, I've struggled with addiction. I can say I've been hospitalized for attempted suicide. I've been in an abusive situation. And no longer does it carry that stigma. Now it's something that I know for sure. And when I tell my story, no one else can tell that for me. It's mine, and there's dignity there. And then that last piece that I've been unpacking through that time was all of that pain. Sometimes it just really is painful. Losing my friend, or losing loved ones, or not having a support system like we had hoped for. Just being, I guess, willing to feel it, and then recognizing that there's purpose in that. And for me, that purpose started to become clear as I started to serve and look for ways to look outside of myself. And it wasn't, toward the beginning of my journey, but toward the end of my journey, when I started to be able to go out into public. I started to see other people's pain, and my experience created an empathy in me.
I was just going to ask you that. I was going to say, through everything that you felt in that healing, I'm sure it made you more empathetic to those that have walked a similar journey or gone through hard things. That you can look at that person and not look at it with judgment, but look at it with, you can get through this. And
yeah,
I think that's a real gift to the empathy aspect, because sometimes it's tough to, not everybody is empathetic, but I think having walked the journey that you walked, I think that really made you who you are to be able to be that way.
Yeah, for sure. And I would add that it creates a depth in us. Like you said, it can, not that we don't judge, because I still move to judgment, but I hurt the most people when I was hurting. And I wasn't mindful of it at the time. I really was just trying to survive, and I wasn't aware of the people that I was hurting. And if that was true for me, then it's true for other people. And starting to, like I said, at one point I started to really look at things, and seeing these fleshy humans who also have hurt me or have shown up in hurtful ways, and they became human to me. And that helped me to forgive. And the hardest person to forgive was myself. But I did have an experience where I was able to forgive my captor. And I just want to say that I don't think that it's necessary that everybody forgive somebody, especially face-to-face, or I believe that forgiveness can be done without the other person. Yeah. It really is between us and our source, however that is defined for you. Again, there's power in that, in knowing that this is mine and I can put it down as soon as I'm ready. But for me, I felt like that was important, and I've since learned why. I used to have a lot of flashbacks and night terrors, and I would wake up and, just soaking wet and just gasping and having a really hard time. And so now I recognize that meeting and extending that forgiveness was when those flashbacks went away for me. And I really believe, as I stood in front of this monster from my dreams, this monster from my memory, and he was a person, and my husband was there, and I could sense that he was afraid in that moment. And it created this, I felt this compassion for him as a person that didn't know what was about to happen. He didn't know why we were there. He didn't know what was coming. And I had written a letter because I didn't know if I would be able to say what I needed to say. And I didn't necessarily want to let him off the hook. Like, I wanted to forgive him, but I wanted him to know that our experience together changed who I was. It changed the wife and mother that I became. And I didn't ever press charges, and there was never a consequence. And I wanted him to have that moment where he could carry it long enough that he could do whatever he needed to do with that. But I needed him to know. For me, I needed him to know. And so I handed him that letter, and then he didn't fall on his knees and beg forgiveness, and he didn't apologize. He wasn't able to show up that way. He actually acted confused, like, forgive me for what? Like, what? Forgive me for what? And of course, I don't know who that act was for. It's just the three of us there. But I just saw him in that moment. And I said, okay, let's go. And we got back in the car and we drove away. And for me, it was done. Like, he had shrunk. He had become a human again. And he has never haunted my dreams in that way since. I've had other memories come up, or I've had to deal with other things to a new level, because healing from trauma, I don't think, is ever a perfect straight path. And it's okay that it's not. I don't think we need to know that it's going to be perfect. I think we need to know that it's possible, and that we can have life beyond that, and that we can create purpose from that pain. But I know how to, as I feel that come up in my body, I'm more aware. I'm able to try to listen to myself better. So I am becoming through this process. And even as these things come up now, I have different resources and different skill sets that I just didn't have then.
Yeah.
So, and I think there's hope in that. If people are struggling with any of these things, they could be, they call them big T traumas or little T traumas. I don't think it matters. It matters how we carry them, and how we honor them, and how we move through them. And so that really is why I share my story. It's not to satisfy people's curiosity or to sensationalize anything. It really is to show that there's life after trauma. Because being in that second captivity of the fear, pain, and shame, it was so painful. It was more painful than anything I experienced physically. And it was a very difficult time. And I needed to hold on to hope. I needed to know that it was survivable. And so that's why I want to add my voice to what you're doing. And I love that, what you're doing, because you're showing people that it's survivable, that there's a next week, and that there's a next month or a next year, and things are coming that, of course, we had no idea.
Yeah. Well, I think when you're in the middle of the trauma, and everything relates in prevention to me, whether it's addiction or suicide or just adverse experiences that you experience. But when you're in the middle of your trauma, your peripheral vision goes away,
Yes.
and you become ultra focused on the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what you experienced, I think part of it is common to try to outrun it, to try to distract yourself, to try to change your focus and just keep moving.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, you can't run forever, and it would be exhausting if you did.
Oh, yeah.
And eventually you face it. And I think a timeline is just very typical for especially women in their late 30s and in their early 40s, in that time frame, to have that past come back.
Yeah.
And maybe it has something to do with, having children, and then you look at your children and you're wanting for them this life that you didn't get.
Yes.
You want to give them something better. And so as you're watching your children grow, I think you see those experiences come through that you went through, and it just kind of makes it right in your face again. And,
Yeah, it does.
and so your story does give a lot of hope, because you've turned the corner. You've got a beautiful family now, and you've been able to find healing in other ways, doing some pretty remarkable stuff. So tell us kind of where your path has led now and what you're doing.
Yeah. So I mentioned that for me, as I started to get stronger and go back out into the world, pushing back those walls, until I started to want to do service and want to, like I say, that shift of focusing on other people. I feel like it's a true principle, and for me is where I experienced the biggest shift in my healing. And I recognize that I wasn't broken. Like, as I see and hear other people's story, I'm like, oh, we're not broken. We're having experiences, and other people have experiences too. And I started to volunteer with an anti-trafficking organization, and of course my story is not human trafficking, but those themes of captivity, and then also sexual assault or sexual violence, I just feel very strongly about. And so I started to volunteer with them, and over time we decided we sold our home. We were here local in Tooele County, but we sold our home and 80% of our belongings. We bought a one-way ticket and took our family to Haiti. And we bought a one-way ticket because we didn't know our return date, and we didn't know how long we would be there. But it only ended up being about 2 months. But while we were there, we saw things that changed my life. And one of them was, I was building files for children in orphanage, and I'm watching the older youth on the balcony, just kind of going through their day, and I'm aware of how old they are and that they're about to age out of the orphanage, but I know that they're not aware. And I also know that they're not prepared. And I think that because of my own experience leaving home, at 17 and being unprepared, it just ignited something in me, and I thought, we're so grateful that there are organizations that do rescues of human trafficking, but for us, we knew that our heart and time needed to go into the prevention and aftercare of human trafficking. And so we felt that if we could provide these kids as they are leaving the orphanage, and where they're at the greatest risk is going back out into the community. If we could provide them with a mentor, somebody to walk the path with them, that was something that was super huge for me personally in my journey. And then also some life skills so that they can navigate that safely. And so we came home, and and started our nonprofit. It's called Empowering the One. And I'm the founder and executive director of that now. And like I said, we do prevention and aftercare of human trafficking. And we actually launched our program with the kids in January of 2018. And we just are seeking to help them find that safe place to land. And that could be going back to family when it's safe to do so. Not always safe, but if there's a foster situation in the community, and if not, is there some sort of independent housing or apprenticeship that could be put together? And so that's what we do. And of course, as they move back out into the community, providing trauma therapy, which I used to be kind of anti-therapy, because for me it hadn't been successful. I felt a little circular, and I now know that if you don't have the right therapist, if it's feeling circular, it may just not be the right relationship. It's not, the process of therapy, because now I'm very pro therapy. I've learned about a modality called EMDR that has been extremely effective for me to process through old memories and kind of release that trauma. And so I'm pro therapy now, so that's something we do as the Kids Land, is provide trauma therapy and also some education and ways for them to create that future of freedom, dignity, and purpose, which is part of what we want for ourselves and what we want for them.
So when you're in Haiti, tell me, at what age do they age out of the orphanage?
So there really is no age that they would age out of the orphanage per se. It could be any time they're released, but they age out of the adoption process about 16.
16. Mm-hmm. And so then they're just on the streets?
They can be just released out on their own. And if you look at risk factors for human trafficking, some of the top risk factors would include a lack of family connections or community connections. Also, extreme poverty, though not always, and previous trauma, because previous trauma can often lead to future traumas, and as it was in my case. So that's like the kids in our program hit each one of those. Yeah. And so,
yeah, and we've seen some rescues in Haiti with Operation Underground Railroad and things like that. So. And you're fitting a very specific niche that maybe I haven't seen before, and that is, it's great to rescue them, but now what? Now where do you take them? So back to those 2 months in Haiti, do you have a specific child that stands out in your mind, or a specific story that stands out in your mind from your time there, that touched your heart? Or
I think of a couple of kids that we've transitioned. There are some that are still preparing to transition, so we don't actually work with or stay with the orphanage. We're really in that gap. We're standing in that gap. But we had there was a young lady that was preparing to she needed to transition out and did not have family, so we were able to find a foster situation in the community, and she's able to continue to go to school and get some help that she needs for healing and some trauma therapy, and she's doing well in that situation, so that's been really positive. There's also a young man that same situation, but he really wanted to become a farmer and be involved with the animals and agriculture, and so he is now in a apprenticeship in a mountain community and living on his own, but under supervision with others in the community, and he is thriving in that environment. But that's kind of the point of Empowering the One, is that it has to be so unique and so individual, because what worked for that young man certainly wouldn't work for the next. Maybe he needs to look at business class or entrepreneurship. And so just providing, looking at them individually, and their mentor helping them to discern what would be the best path for them, and for them just to know that they're not alone. And like we've been talking about all night, this journey of healing, having somebody to walk a path with you, having somebody stay with you, it's so much more than moving day. It really is now what. And when we don't have the skill set and we don't have support around us, that leaves us vulnerable to exploitation and vulnerable to those future traumas. So that's what we're striving to do, is just give them as many opportunities as possible to be successful, and then staying with them and following them through that.
And I can see where that would offer you some healing from
Absolutely.
being that person that maybe you wished you could have had in your life to pull you from similar situations and stuff. So,
yes.
So,
go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I found that for me, well, I think for anyone, empowering others empowers us.
Yeah.
And so that's that role of service. When we see that there might not be a lot we can do, but there's something we can do, and we might not be able to, when there are mass problems or things like that, we think, mass solution, but that's really what's called for. But just knowing that doing something in one person's life is always worth doing.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And it's one of those deals that you might wonder, am I making an impact? Am I making an impact? And you might not hear the story that, hey, you changed my life, but it's happening because it takes people that are motivated into trying to leave this place better than we found it.
Right.
And so I admire that about you. So how do people find you and find your foundation?
So our nonprofit is called Empowering the One, mm-hmm. and we have a website, just empoweringtheone.org, and they could find me through email, just Liz Stone at empoweringtheone.org, and we're also looking to trying to do some things a little bit more locally, and some of that we're still fleshing out what that might look like. Maybe we can talk about it in the future, but just creating resources for people who have experienced trauma in their life. I think we were talking about earlier that oftentimes, again, it's not the trauma, but the unresolved trauma can lead to addiction, or it can lead and feed into anxiety and depression, and then suicide and suicide ideation. And in my experience with the work that we do with human trafficking, or my own personal with domestic violence or sexual assault, those traumas start to stack. And so we want to start creating resources so that people know that, yes, healing is possible, and there's no one right resource, just like there's no one right path for any child. Yeah. But resources are out there, and starting to help people to know that, somebody can show up and start to help them walk through that.
Now, on your website, does it actually have different resources?
It does not currently.
Okay.
And that's something that we'll probably build into more of Liz Stone, okay. And the website that we're building there. But so for right now, if that's something that would be beneficial to people and they want to learn more about ways, different resources for trauma, and then also ways to navigate through that, mm-hmm. Then they could reach out through Liz Stone at empoweringtheone.org, and I can keep them updated as that starts to come available.
Okay, that's perfect. And you are available for speaking engagements?
Absolutely.
And again, just email you, mm-hmm. reach out to you through that way.
Yes.
And
there is a contact page on Empowering the One.
Okay.
So either one of those will work, but email's great.
Alrighty. And what am I missing? Is there anything that we're leaving out? I don't want to miss anything because you got some good stuff happening.
I know. I'm just trying to think if there is anything. I think that as we develop, starting to build things in communities where I'm a fan of not duplicating efforts. Mm-hmm. So where there are other organizations already doing that work, moving into more of collaboration, mm-hmm. and there are those. In fact, I've heard a couple on your podcast where this is kind of their area, like addiction recovery, or these are things that they are doing. And so we're just seeking to partner with others so that we can create more impact. And the other thing, as you mentioned, it's sometimes hard to know what the end result will be of our efforts, and maybe even for you with this podcast. But I would say we know for sure that those adverse experiences ripple through our lives, and then they ripple through our families unintentionally. And I am just going to say that these efforts to, providing hope, but with resources behind the hope, and providing guides and a way and a path, and starting to shine light on that, then that too ripples, and that goes out and then in through families too. So I'm really grateful that you had me here.
Well, and that's the one thing that I like about your story. And we featured a few stories that are success stories like yours, where life could have gone a whole different direction. And if there's one message that I want the listeners to get out of this, is your past doesn't define who you are, and you can break the chain, because in so many of these experiences that you dealt with, that chain could have gone on and on and on, and it could have changed the outcome of your life. And so, I know that it wasn't something you were trying to outrun it for a moment.
Right.
It's nothing that you wanted to face, but once you did face that, you came out stronger.
Yeah, it was absolutely worth it. And I like being someone who is on this side saying that's worth it, because it was really, really hard. But to have, I wanted that to go away as quickly as it appeared to come. It didn't come overnight, but it felt like it did, right? But if that had gone away overnight, I would have missed out on so much growth and so much opportunity. And there is a depth that wasn't there before. And I think that there's value in our experiences. And so we don't want to, it's not fun in the moment, but just even to be able to sit with that and have that be okay. And you had mentioned with those experiences, sometimes it can take us down. And for me, it definitely did for a time. But I don't believe that there's such a thing as too far, too much, too late. I really believe that if we are at any point, if you recognize that you're on the wrong path and you turn around, it's the perfect time. At any point, when we know better, we do better. And then I believe in timing, and the resources can show up for us. We just have to be aware that they're out there. And that's what we're striving to do, I think.
I agree with you 100%. So I guess in closing, the one thing that I think it would be important for the listeners to know is, if you're experiencing something traumatic in your life, find that safe person that you can talk to. You had an experience where that person didn't end up being safe, and so it made you shut down. But it's so important to find that person that is your safe person. Absolutely. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a grandparent, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's a teacher, a counselor, somebody. Find that safe person and talk it through, because that can shorten what you're experiencing by so much. And if you are a victim of a sexual assault, you need to talk to somebody about that. I think that can be so helpful and shorten that grief period that you go through, and the shame and everything.
Yes, absolutely.
And when it comes to domestic violence and things, there are resources out there. But the one thing you need to understand is they do always seem to try to isolate you from your loved ones. Don't allow that to happen.
The red flags.
Don't allow that to happen, because those loved ones are the ones that you can count on. And so if you've heard anything in here and you're wondering where you can get those resources, feel free to reach out to Liz at her email. Say it one more time.
Liz Stone at empoweringtheone.org.
And you can reach me at lifesworthlivingfoundation@gmail.com, and let's have that discussion. And if you're sitting in a place that you're having thoughts that are scaring you, and you're feeling like maybe you can't go on any longer, remember that there's a lifeline. There is someone. If you don't have that safe person in your life, there is someone that you can reach 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, and call that lifeline. That number is 1-800-273-8255, and there will be a licensed clinical social worker that can help you work through those, whatever you're going through, as somebody that will understand and not judge and not look at you with any sort of judgment. So remember that lifeline, 1-800-273-8255. Thanks again for coming tonight, Liz.
Absolutely.
And
thank you for having me.
well, I'm very honored that you'd come, and next time you come, Steve, I want to see the Superman shirt. So we got Steve here with us too, but I am very grateful for you, and I'm grateful tonight that this podcast is having kind of the reach that it's having. One thing that I don't mention every week when I always forget to do this, but if you know somebody that you think this story would help, share it. It's so easy to share the episode with somebody that you think it would impact. That's how we get this out there. That's how we get the listens and how we get it into the right hands. So share that. With social media, we can get it into so many hands if everybody has that share. The other thing is, if you like what you're hearing on this podcast, click subscribe, rate, and review. That helps it in our listing on Apple and some of the different places where you get your podcast. Go ahead and do that. That means so much to us when you rate and review and give us your opinion. If there is somebody that you'd like to see me feature on this podcast, or a topic you want us to address, reach out to me at 435-277-0235 and let me know what you're wanting to hear, somebody that you're wanting me to interview, because I'd love to do whatever you'd like to hear. So I appreciate the audience so much. It means so much to me that you come back week after week. I know it's not for me, it's for the guest. And so thanks again, Liz, for being here tonight. Thanks to our sponsors, GTM Builders, A. Warner Homes Real Estate, and Comfort Inn and Suites of Lake Point. And we'll talk to you again next week. Thanks.